How Democracies Perish by Jean-François Revel. Let me walk you through a little French classic titled How Democracies Perish by Jean-François Revel. The book came out over 40 years ago, but you'd swear Revel had a time machine and wrote it this morning. Revel saw the whole script before the actors even took the stage. It's a fascinating, although painful, look at the state we're in. 1. The core puzzle. Revel starts with a paradox. Every Western society is richer, freer, more life-enhancing and on paper stronger than any rival system. Yet these same strengths make us uniquely vulnerable. Why? Because the virtues we prize, free speech, compassion, rule of law, tolerance, reconciliation, can be weaponized by forces that do not believe in any of those virtues. But once the weapon is forged, the open society, the democracy, is obliged by its own rules to hand the enemy tons of ammunition. Think of it as a judo move where the opponent uses your own weight against you. The throw is almost elegant until you hit the mat. 2. The inner saboteur. Revel's first bombshell is that the gravest threat rarely comes from outside tanks or missiles. It comes from inside the citadel. Our enemies look like us, speak our language, quote our funding documents. They operate in parliaments, newspapers, classrooms, HR departments. Their superpower is guilt. They tell us that every Western achievement is actually a crime. Our prosperity is plunder. Our borders are aggression. Our faith is bigotry. A civilization that has lost the will to defend itself will voluntarily dismantle its own defenses. Revel calls this auto-dissolution. Rome didn't fall because the Goths were 10 feet tall. Rome fell because Romans stopped believing Rome was worth the effort. 3. The illusion of moral symmetry. One of the most seductive traps, Revel argues, is the habit of treating every actor on the world stage as morally equivalent. If democracy A spies on dictatorship B and dictatorship B spies on democracy A, the journalist feels very equitable, very dignified to say both sides engaged in espionage. The public shrugs, nuance dies. Democracy is as questionable as dictatorship. Dictatorship is as legitimate as democracy. But there is an objective difference between a system that allows journalists to expose its espionage and a system that shoots those journalists in the back of the neck. Pretending the two are the same is not neutrality. It is a subsidy to the stronger lie. 4. The tyranny of procedure. Democracies adore process. We have committees to decide whether we can form a committee. The enemies of the West adore that too, because while we are busy respecting every sub-clause, they are busy exploiting every loophole. A single activist with the right lawyer can stall a border wall for a decade. A handful of NGOs can paralyze executive presidential orders by filing the same injunction in 5 different courts. Revel calls this legalistic insurgency. The insurgent doesn't need to win on the battlefield. He only needs to stretch the timeline until the public loses the will to fight. Time becomes a weapon, and patience is asymmetrical. The saboteur has all the time in the world. The democracy under attack has elections every 4 years. 5. The collapse of cultural confidence. Here we hit the spiritual core of the problem. A society that no longer believes in its own story will not pass that story on to the next generation. The Christian roots that once supplied humility, courage, and a transcendent moral horizon are recast as the original sin of the West. Children learn more about the alleged crimes of their ancestors than about the gifts those ancestors bequeath us. Science, hospitals, universities, the rule of law itself. When you sever a people from their heritage, they do not become neutral atheists, as Richard Dawkins so misguidedly suggested. When you sever a people from their heritage, they become prey. Nature abhors a vacuum, and other narratives and stories that are far less forgiving rush in to fill that vacuum. 6. The traitor mindset. Revel describes a psychological profile that flourishes inside democracies. The citizen who derives his sense of moral superiority precisely from denigrating his own tribe. Every terrorist attack is reflexively blamed on the host society's provocations. Every riot and act of looting is rebranded as uprising. Every demographic transformation and abuse is celebrated as inevitable. The traitor doesn't need a secret handshake. He needs only the dopamine hit of being praised as brave by the very system he is helping to hollow out. The irony would be exquisite if it were not so lethal. 7. The weapon of migration. Revel doesn't focus on migration per se, but he does note that open societies find it nearly impossible to regulate large-scale population inflows once the moral vocabulary has been re-engineered. If every appeal to border integrity is condemned as hate, then the border becomes a fiction. The process is gradual. First a trickle, then a stream, then a demographic tide that arrives not as humble guests, but as electoral shock troops. And again, the democracy under attack is paralyzed by its own decency and etiquette. To notice the pattern is bigotry. To propose limits is fascism. And to enforce existing law is to resort to violence. The judo move completes itself. Our own weight was used to land us on the mat. The marriage of media and universities. Information is the nervous system of a republic. Revel saw that whoever controls the production of information can, over time, rewrite the very instincts of the population. Universities train the teachers. Teachers train the pupils. The pupils become journalists who translate academic jargon into 90-second segments. When this pipeline is captured, the society loses the ability to name its enemies, even to itself. The key tactic is linguistic capture. Yesterday's illegal alien becomes an undocumented resident, then a newcomer, then simply the new neighbor. Each lexical hop seems trivial, but the cumulative effect is a new mental map in which the border no longer exists in the mind before it disappears from the map. 9. Economic subversion. Revel makes a sharp point about economic sabotage. You don't need to blow up factories if you can regulate them into paralysis. Environmental rules become open-ended, tax codes metastasize, ESG criteria quietly divert capital from the industries that keep the lights on. The entrepreneur who once built a plant that provided jobs and paid taxes now has to hire compliance officers whose only job is to fill out forms. Growth slows, optimism dims, and the young conclude that the future lies elsewhere, perhaps in a more vibrant economy that just happens to be run by people with a very different view of human rights. 10. The acceleration trap. One of Revel's most sobering insights is that the process accelerates once the public senses something is off. The more the average citizen tries to speak plainly, the more the machinery of suppression spins to life. A tweet becomes a hate incident. A joke at work becomes HR case 4721/B. A parish sermon invites a community relations investigation. Each crackdown convinces more people that open dissent is suicidal, which in turn makes the next crackdown easier. The trap is sprung. The society can still vote, but only within parameters defined by those who despise the society itself. 11. The role of faith. Revel, though himself a secular liberal, concedes that a republic cannot survive indefinitely on procedural patriotism alone. There must be a transcendent why, some reason the whole experiment is worth the hassle. Christianity once supplied that why, the conviction that every person bears the image of God, therefore every conscience counts, therefore power must be checked and distributed to honor the image of God in every citizen. Remove that theological foundation and the rights become mere privileges, and privileges can be revoked by whoever administers the paperwork. The enemies of the West understand this instinctively. That is why cathedrals are vandalized, but certain other houses of worship receive 24-hour police protection. One fate is to be mocked, another is to be subsidized. The asymmetry is not accidental. 12. The moment of decision. Revel ends with a warning and an exhortation. Democracies do not die in a single dramatic coup. They die by 1,000 small surrenders. The antidote is not to abandon our principles, but to reassert them, vigorously, unapologetically, and in public. That means enforcing existing laws without apology, funding families instead of bureaucracies, and speaking plainly even when the room goes quiet. Revel is under no illusion that the turnaround will be tidy. The judo match is already underway. The only question is whether we will learn to block the throw before our shoulders hit the mat. Practical takeaways for today. 1. Renationalize the narrative. Every school board meeting, every local paper letter to the editor, every parish newsletter is a front in the culture war. Tell the true story of the West, its saints and its sinners, its cathedrals and its abolitionists. Because if we don't, the other side's cartoon version becomes the syllabus for our children and grandchildren's education. 2. Reclaim language. Do not accept euphemisms. Say illegal entry, not irregular migration. Say anti-white discrimination, not diversity initiative. Language is the first battlefield. Lose it and you lose everything downstream. 3. Build parallel institutions. If the local university's history department is lost to wokeness, start a reading group in the church basement. If the mainstream publisher won't touch your manuscript, crowdfund it. Every parallel structure is an antibody against the virus. 4. Have children and have them early. Demography is destiny. The West will not be saved by spreadsheets. It will be saved by cradles. A large family is a political statement, a cultural counterweight, and an economic investment in tomorrow. 5. Practice courage as a habit. Post under your own name when feasible. Speak up at the PTA meeting. Risk the awkward silence. Courage is contagious, but only when it is visible. Closing word. Revel's gift is to show that the fate of the West is not sealed by impersonal forces. It is decided by individual choices, millions of them every day. The enemies of our civilization have a plan, a timeline, and a ruthless work ethic, plus multi-millions from financiers like George Soros and the government of Qatar. But our side has better values, better achievements, better songs, better stories, better lives, and if we choose, bigger and stronger hearts. The hour is late, but the gates are not yet barred. And the story is not over until we decide it is.